Kansas wind found every crack in the old house and sang through it. He was looking for the deed. The left drawer was empty. The right held nothing but yellowed papers and a rusted knife. The small compartment at the back stuck fast. He lifted the front edge the way his hands still remembered, and the wood groaned open. Inside lay a small brown notebook. Leather worn soft from years, pressed against a man's chest. The corners curled inward, as if guarding whatever was written there. He sat in the chair by the window. The plains ran out beyond the glass, endless and patient. He opened the cover. One line in, he stopped, set the notebook on his knee, stared out at the grass for a long time, the wind moving across the land without hurry. He picked it up again. The wind outside leaned harder against the glass. Eli Hargrove was 38 years old the morning he found the notebook. He wasn't looking for it. He was looking for the deed to the north pasture, which his mother had told him was in the left drawer, which was not, which meant going through the right drawer, then the middle drawer, then the small compartment at the back that stuck unless you lifted the front edge slightly before pulling. His father had known that trick. Eli had forgotten it until his fingers remembered it for him. The compartment opened, and there it was, small, brown leather. The kind of notebook a man carries in a shirt pocket for years, until the cover softens from body heat and the corners curl in like they're trying to protect whatever's inside. Eli set the deed aside. He sat down in his father's chair. He opened the notebook. Outside, through the window, the Kansas grass ran on until it met the sky. The same as it always had, the same as it always would. Indifferent and patient and absolutely certain of itself. In a way that Eli had spent 38 years trying to understand. He read the first line. Then he set the notebook down on his knee. Looked out the window for a long time. Then picked it up and read it again from the beginning. This is the story he found inside. In the autumn of 1869, a 21-year-old man named Cole Hargrove, hired on with a cattle outfit moving a herd north out of Texas toward the railhead at Abilene, Kansas. He had $37 to his name, a horse that was better than he deserved, and an understanding that the work was hard, the pay was modest, and the alternative was staying in a place where the shape of his life had already been decided for him. He chose the trail for 8 years. That choice was enough. The trail had its own logic. You moved, you worked, you slept under the sky and woke before it, and the days organized themselves around the simple, non-negotiable requirements of keeping several hundred cattle moving in a consistent direction. There was dignity in that kind of work. There was also loneliness, but out on the trail, the loneliness had company. Every drover knew it, felt it the same way, didn't talk about it, which was its own form of comfort. Cole was good at the work. He was good with horses, patient with cattle, and he had the particular quality that trail bosses valued above everything else, which was that he did what he said he would do every time without being reminded. He was not dramatic. He was not interesting in the way that made men tell stories about you. He was the man you wanted at your back in a river crossing and forgot about completely at a dance. He understood this about himself without bitterness. It was simply accurate. The trail ran between Texas and Kansas along a route that had been worn into the earth by a decade of hooves. Cole rode it 7 times in 8 years. He knew every river, every settlement, every stretch of bad grass. He knew the way the sky looked above the Flint Hills in late April, which was a specific shade of pale gold that he had never seen anywhere else and had no words for, which bothered him in a way he couldn't fully explain. The need for words. He had it. He didn't know what to do with it on the trail. So he read when he could, which wasn't often, and thought a great deal, which cost nothing. In the summer of 1877, 3 days north of the Red River, Cole saw a family camped at the edge of a creek, a man, a woman, 2 small children, a wagon loaded with furniture and crates, and the accumulated weight of a life being moved from one place to another. The man was repairing a wheel. The woman was cooking over a small fire. The children were doing what children do when there is open country around them. which is run. Cole rode past them at a distance. The woman looked up. She said something to the man. He looked up too. They didn't wave. Cole didn't wave. It was just a glance, the kind that happens 100 times a day on the frontier, meaning nothing. Except Cole rode another 50 yards, then stopped, sat on his horse, looked at the family. At the man bent over the wheel. At the woman stirring something that smelled like it might be the best meal Cole had eaten in 3 weeks. At the two children racing each other through the grass, shrieking. Absolutely certain that this moment was the most important moment that had ever happened. He sat there long enough that the trail boss rode back to check on him. Problem? No, Cole said. Then move. He moved, but he carried that image for the rest of the drive. The man and the wheel, the woman and the fire, the children and the grass. And underneath all of it, quiet and inconvenient, and without any obvious solution, a feeling he had no name for, not loneliness. Something emptier than that. Loneliness implies wanting company. This was different. This was the feeling of a man who has been building something for a long time and suddenly cannot remember what he was building it toward. He filed on 320 acres under the Homestead Act in October of 1877. The land was in Pawnee County, Kansas. Flat, grassy, the kind of land that other homesteaders sometimes passed over because it looked like nothing, which Cole understood was a misreading. It didn't look like nothing. It looked like everything that hadn't happened yet. The Homestead Act required 5 years of continuous settlement and cultivation. After 5 years, the land was yours. Cole had done the arithmetic. He was 29 years old. He would be 34 when the land became his outright. That seemed right. That seemed like the correct number of years for the kind of man he intended to become on this ground. He built a dugout first, which was practical, which was what you did. A room cut into the side of a low rise, earth walls, a plank door, a single window facing east. It was not beautiful. It was exactly what it needed to be. He lived in it through the winter of 1877 and into 1878 while he broke sod and planted his first crop and began the longer, slower work of understanding the particular character of his land. Every piece of ground has a character. Cole came to believe this firmly. His 320 acres was stubborn in the northwest corner, where the soil ran rocky and resisted the plow. It was generous in the center, where the grass came up thick and the earth turned dark and rich. It was melancholy along the south fence line, where the wind hit hardest in winter, and nothing grew quite as tall as it did elsewhere. He learned these things the way you learn anything real, which is by paying attention over a long time and letting what you notice accumulate into something that starts to resemble knowledge. In the spring of 1878, he planted turkey red wheat on 20 acres. A Mennonite family from Russia had brought the variety into Kansas 2 years prior, and the older farmers swore by it. Cole had no strong opinion about wheat varieties. He had no strong opinion about most things that could not be tested. He planted it and watched it and let it tell him what it thought of his land. It thought well of his land. By the summer of 1879, Cole had 40 acres under wheat, a small herd of cattle, a kitchen garden that fed him adequately through spring and fall, and the dugout that he had expanded once, but which was still, fundamentally, a hole in the ground. It was time to build the house. He drew the plans himself, on the back of a flour sack, because he did not have paper, which was fine, because the flour sack was large and gave him room to think. 4 rooms. 2 windows on the south side to catch the winter light. A fireplace with a stone hearth. The stones would come from the creek bed, which had good flat limestone. A front porch. He measured the porch twice. Long enough for 2 chairs. He was certain about this before he was certain about anything else. In the plans, which he noted to himself and set aside as a piece of information that was interesting, but not yet explicable. He started building in July of 1879, which was not the ideal time to start building because of the heat, but Cole had decided, and that was that. He dug the foundation first, set the cornerstones, measured the walls. Then he stopped. He walked to the barn, where he had 2 pieces of good ash wood he'd been curing for most of a year. He looked at them for a while. Then he carried them to the space, in front of the unfinished house where the porch would eventually be, and he began to build chairs. 2 chairs. From the ash wood. He worked on them for 3 days, which was 3 days he was not building the actual structure of the house, which was objectively a strange allocation of his time. He knew this. He did not alter it. The chairs were well made. He was careful about the joints, careful about the proportions, careful about the finish, which he rubbed with linseed oil, until the grain came up, clear, and the surface had a quality of warmth that you noticed when you ran your hand across it. He put them on the not-yet porch. They sat in front of framing and unset stone, and the general organized chaos of a building in progress. They looked, Ira Colton said later, like a fever dream. Ira Colton had the neighboring homestead to the east. He was 42, bearded, and had been on his land for 12 years, which meant he knew things about Kansas winters and Kansas summers and Kansas soil, and the particular stubbornness required to outlast both. He was not a man who wasted words. He was also not a man who could look at 2 finished chairs, sitting in front of an unfinished house, and say nothing. He came to help with the roof beams on a Tuesday. He arrived, tied his horse, looked at the chairs, looked at Cole. You don't have a wife. Not yet. Those are 2 chairs. I can count, Ira. Ira Colton looked at the chairs again, then at the framing going up behind them. Then back at Cole. You built the chairs before you built the house. I built them before I finished the house. Before you started the roof. Yes. Before you set the hearthstone. Yes. Before, Ira said slowly. You have a roof over those chairs. If I don't know what I'm building toward, Cole said. What am I building? A long pause. Ira Colton picked up his end of the first roof beam. Get the other end, he said. He never brought up the chairs again. Which, Cole reflected later, was the most respectful thing Ira could have done. Understanding didn't require agreement. It just required the willingness to pick up your end of the beam. The house took until September. 4 rooms, south-facing windows, stone fireplace, the stones carried from the creek bed in the back of the wagon, sorted by size, set in 3 days of work that left Cole's hands raw and his back convinced it had been personally wronged. A porch that ran the full width of the front, wide enough for 2 chairs. He moved the chairs onto the finished porch on a Wednesday afternoon, sat in one of them. Reckoning, his cattle dog, came around from the back of the house and sat next to him. The dog had opinions about everything and communicated them through a precise vocabulary of ear positions and weight shifts that Cole had become fluent in over 2 years. The ears were at neutral. The weight was settled. This was the dog's assessment that the current situation was, on balance, acceptable. Cole agreed. The late September light was the color of old brass. The air smelled like wheat straw and the particular dryness of plains air in autumn, which was not like any other dryness, which was its own thing. He looked at the empty chair beside him for a while. Then he stood up and went to write the advertisement. He sat down with paper and a pencil at the kitchen table and stared at the blank page for longer than he expected. This was not a man who stalled. He had built a house. He had broken 40 acres of sod. He had driven cattle up the Chisholm Trail 7 times without turning back. Stalling was not in his character, and yet the advertisement had to be true. Not just accurate, true. He had a particular and specific objection to language that was technically accurate, but created a false impression. He had seen too many men on the trail who kept their word to the letter and violated it in every way that mattered. He would not be that so. He wrote what was true. He was 31. He held 320 acres under the Homestead Act, with 3 years remaining on the 5-year requirement. He farmed wheat and kept cattle. He did not drink, not from principle, but from observation, which was that alcohol cost more than it returned in every currency, including money. He did not quarrel unnecessarily. He kept his word. He was reasonably literate. meaning he had read more books than most men he knew, and had opinions about them, which was unusual for a Kansas homesteader, and which he did not flag as unusual because it should not need flagging. He was not a handsome man. He was a capable man. He understood the distinction mattered. He read what he had written true, accurate, also completely inert. He looked out the window. The porch was there. The chairs were there. The plane's light was going amber over the grass. He wrote one more sentence, not because it was practical, because it was accurate in the deeper way. The house has a porch with 2 chairs and a view of the grass that goes on until it meets the sky. I would very much like someone to sit in the second one. He read it back, didn't change it, folded the paper, rode to town the next morning, and placed it in the Kansas City Journal. 43 women wrote back. This surprised him. Not that women had answered. He had expected answers, which was why he'd placed the advertisement. The surprise was the number. 43 felt large. 43 felt like more than the advertisement warranted. He was a decent man on a modest claim in Pawnee County, Kansas. Not a particularly compelling prospect by any objective measure. He thought about it for a while, then he understood. The last sentence. That was what had done it. The practical sentences described a man, a reasonable man. A man who didn't drink and kept his word and had 40 acres under cultivation. That was fine. That was the kind of information that told a woman whether she was wasting her time. But the last sentence, the chairs, the grass, the sky. I would very much like someone. That was not information. That was an admission. And admissions from men who are otherwise entirely practical land differently than admissions from men who are otherwise entirely sentimental. They land with weight. Because a man who has built a house and broken 40 acres of sod and organized his finances and not wasted a word in 4 sentences, and then, at the end, says, I would very much like someone. That man has revealed something true. Cole looked at the 43 letters stacked on his kitchen table. Then he opened the first one. It described the writer's height, the color of her hair, her domestic skills, the dimensions of her father's farm, and her hope that Mr. Hargrove would find her suitable. He read it, set it aside. Opened the second, similar the third. Different details. Same structure. He read all 43 letters that afternoon and into the evening, with reckoning asleep under the table and the October light coming through the south windows and going amber and then going away. 42 of the 43 letters described the writer's appearance. The 43rd did not. The 43rd was from a woman named Evelyn Marsh in Boston, Massachusetts, and it opened like this. I work as a compositor at my father's print shop. I have done this work since I was 12. I am telling you this because I suspect many women who answer these advertisements do not lead with the information that might discourage a man, and I find that practice dishonest and therefore useless. Cole put the other 42 letters in a stack to the left. He moved the letter from Evelyn Marsh to the center of the table. Write it again. She was 26. She described not what she looked like, but how she moved through the world. Methodically, with attention, with a compositor's habit of checking everything twice before committing it to print. She described her father's shop, which she clearly loved, not as a location but as a system, a place where language was organized and made physical, and sent out into the world with the expectation that it meant what it said. She described her reason for answering the advertisement without sentimentality. She was not looking for romance. In the conventional sense, she wrote, she was looking for a particular thing and had been looking for it long enough to know it wasn't in Boston, which was a city where everything had already been decided, the West. She wrote, seems to me to be a place where a person might be allowed to be exactly what they are, without the city's opinion of what that should look like. I don't know if that is true. I have never been there, but I read your advertisement to the last sentence and thought that a man who builds a porch with 2 chairs before he has anyone to sit in them might understand what I mean. She had not signed it. yours or sincerely or any of the conventional closings. She had signed it. E. Marsh, who is direct to a fault and considers this a feature, not a flaw. Cole read the letter 3 times. Then he looked at the 42 other letters on the left side of the table, left them there, went to the writing desk, and began to draft a reply. He did not tell Evelyn Marsh that her letter was the best of 43. He told her about turkey red wheat. He told her that he had been skeptical, that he'd planted it based on the testimony of old farmers who had been skeptical about most things, and therefore worth listening to when they weren't, and that it had rewarded his willingness to be persuaded by returning the best yield he'd had since breaking ground. He told her about reckoning. The dog's name, he explained, came from a particular conversation he'd had with himself during the winter of his second year on the claim. When the wind had been blowing for 11 days straight, and the temperature had not risen above 0, and he had run out of the kind of mental occupation that keeps a man from staring too long at walls. He had decided that every man eventually comes to a reckoning with the question of what his life is for. He had decided to name the dog that as a reminder. The dog, for his part, seemed to find the name appropriate. He told her that he thought language was probably the most important thing humanity had ever produced, which he had thought for a long time, but had never said aloud, because it was not the kind of thing you could say aloud on a cattle drive without a great deal of unwanted follow-up. He told her about the chairs. "I built them before I built the house proper," he wrote. "I am aware this is a strange order of operations, but I have found that if you know what you are building toward, the practical steps arrange themselves." The chair was the point. The house is infrastructure. He read that last sentence back. It was true. It was also, he reflected, the first time he had ever articulated something he had only previously understood as a feeling. Writing it down changed it slightly, made it more real, made it also slightly frightening, in the way that true things sometimes are when you first hold them up to the light. He sent the letter. Evelyn Marsh received it on a Thursday evening. She was at the shop. Her father had gone home an hour earlier. The press was quiet. The smell of ink and paper and metal type had been the smell of every important moment in her life, for as long as she could remember, which she had, at some point stopped noticing, and at some other point started noticing again with the specific attention you give things you understand. "You will, someday, miss." She read the letter in the compositor's chair, slowly, the way she read things that were worth reading. The chair was the point. The house is infrastructure. She read that sentence and felt something move behind her ribs, not excitement. More specific than that. The feeling of finding a thing you'd been looking for without knowing exactly what you were looking for. The way you feel it, you pick up a piece of type and it fits precisely into the space that needed it, and you know before you've finished setting the line that this sentence is going to come out right. Right? She read it, set the letter down, picked it up. This is possibly. She stopped herself there. She was careful with herself about this. She was 26 years old, and she had been a compositor for 14 years, and she knew that setting a line wrong was always faster than setting it right, and that the time you saved by going quickly was always repaid with interest in the corrections you had to make afterward. She was not going to rush this. She set Cole Hargrove's letter on the corner of the type case, went to the back of the shop, made herself a cup of tea from the small stove her father kept there, drank it standing up, looking at nothing in particular, giving herself time for the thing moving behind her ribs to settle into something she could evaluate calmly. Then she sat back down and wrote her reply. This is what Evelyn Marsh was. She was 26 years old in the autumn of 1879. She had grown up in 3 rooms behind her father's print shop on a side street in Boston, Massachusetts. Her mother had died when Evelyn was 8, a fever that took her in 4 days, and what Evelyn remembered about this was not grief, which had come later and slowly, but the specific clarity of the world immediately after, the way objects looked more themselves. The press, the type cases, her father's hands. She had begun working in the shop at 12, first sweeping, then helping set type, then setting it herself, then correcting it, then reading the proofs. By 16, she was faster than any compositor her father had employed. By 20, she was, without title or formality, the person who ran the compositional side of the operation. She had read everything that came through the shop, not just the newspapers and pamphlets and commercial printing that paid the bills, but the books. Every book that came in for reprinting. Every manuscript that a hopeful author brought in with shaking hands. She read with the compositor's habit of attention, not just for meaning, but for the way meaning was constructed, the way a sentence built toward its end, the way a paragraph created a kind of pressure that the next paragraph either released or increased. She had opinions, precise ones. She had learned to keep most of them to herself in company, not because she lacked confidence, but because she had observed, early and comprehensively, that women with precise opinions were considered difficult, and she had decided that she did not want to spend her energy managing other people's discomfort with her accuracy. This was not bitterness. This was efficiency. She had looked at matrimonial columns for 6 months before writing to Cole Hargrove. She read them with the same attention she gave proofs, looking for the errors that revealed what the writer actually meant, as opposed to what they were claiming to mean. Most of the advertisements failed this test immediately. They promised things they couldn't demonstrate. They made claims without evidence. They used words in the approximate way, meaning whatever was convenient, which was, in Evelyn's view, the worst possible use of language. Then she had read Cole Hargrove's advertisement. The practical sentences were fine, competent. She had set them aside in her mind the way you set aside sentences that are technically correct. Then the last sentence, I would very much like someone to sit in the second chair. She had read it 3 times. Right there, at the type case, while the afternoon light came through the shop windows, and the press waited patiently for the next job. Then she had written the most direct letter she had ever written. She described herself as a compositor, which she knew was the information most likely to discourage a man who wanted a conventional wife. She described her lack of domestic skill, except organization, her habit of reading until very late, and her conviction that the West was a place where a person might be allowed to be exactly what they were. She did not mention the chair directly, but she thought about it. The chair and the man who had built it before the house was finished and had written about it in an advertisement because he considered it the truest thing he had to say. She thought about what it meant to know your own point clearly enough to build toward it before you had any practical reason to. She had thought about that for a long time after she sealed the letter. Their letters found a rhythm. December, January. Cole wrote about the land. Not descriptively, not the way a man describes scenery to impress someone, but the way you describe a thing you are in a working relationship with. The northwest corner's stubbornness, the center field's generosity, the south fence line's melancholy, which was a word he used, and then crossed out, and then uncrossed because it was accurate, and the accurate word was the right word. Evelyn wrote about language, about the difference between words that meant what they said and words that meant what was convenient, about a manuscript she'd set in January by a man who used 12 words where 2 would do, which she found morally objectionable in a way she understood was excessive but maintained anyway. The letters grew longer. By February, they were what Cole would later describe, with characteristic understatement, as substantial. By March, they were essays on wheat and the ethics of honesty, on language and the character of land, on the specific quality of light in different geographies, on the pleasure of working with your hands, on why both of them had, independently and by different routes, arrived at the same conclusion, which was that a life chosen deliberately was worth 10 lives that happened to you, on dogs, at some length, on the particular freedom of the frontier, and whether that way freedom was real, or merely the absence of the specific constraints you'd left behind, and the presence of entirely new constraints you hadn't yet cataloged, on what it meant to build something from nothing, on fear. That one surprised Cole. He was not a man who discussed fear. He had spent 8 years on the trail, with men who treated the admission of fear the way they treated all admissions, as weakness, as leverage, as something to be locked away and forgotten. He had absorbed this approach without deciding to. It was simply the atmosphere, and then Evelyn Marsh, in a letter that arrived on a Tuesday in late February, wrote, "I think the thing I'm most afraid of is getting exactly what I want, and discovering I was wrong about what I wanted, which sounds like the fear of disappointment but isn't, quite. It's more the fear of having been mistaken about yourself, of finding out that the person you thought you were is not the person you are." Cole read this letter twice, then wrote back, "I know exactly what you mean, and I will tell you that the only cure I've found is to keep building toward the thing you believe, is the point, and trust that if you're wrong, the evidence will arrive clearly enough to correct you. You have to trust yourself enough to find out." He put that letter in the envelope, held the envelope for a moment, thought about what it meant that he had just written the truest thing he had ever written to a person he had never met, sent it anyway. March brought the first real problem, not to Cole. Not yet to Evelyn, her father, Gideon Marsh. 60 years old and as sturdy as the press he had operated for 35 years, collapsed behind the type case on a Wednesday afternoon. Not collapsed. That was her word for it, the word she used in the letter to Cole, because it was less frightening than what the doctor had said, which was stroke, which was a word that sounded like what it was, and therefore was not a word she could write, without feeling the weight of it settle into her chest. He survived. He was Gideon Marsh. He survived things through the combined force of physical stubbornness and a lifelong conviction that he had too much left to do to have any business dying. His speech came back within 2 weeks. His right hand came back more slowly. The press, the large Hoe cylinder press that was the heart of the shop, that required both hands and a precise physical knowledge of its moods and resistances. The press was not possible for him, not yet, maybe not for a long time. Evelyn wrote to Cole immediately. Not because she had decided anything. Because she had told him in one of the early letters that she valued immediate honesty, and he had told her the same. And she had adopted this preference as her own, which meant the moment there was something to tell, she told it. "My father had a stroke. He is recovering and we expect a full recovery, but it will take time. I cannot in good conscience leave him without someone capable of running. The press, I don't know when this will change. I wanted to tell you immediately." She sealed the letter, posted it, went back to the shop and ran the press herself, which she had always known how to do, and which she now did with the particular focus of a person who has understood that the situation has changed, and that understanding it clearly is the only useful first response. She did not cry until later. In the evening, in the 3 rooms behind the shop. Quietly, because crying quietly was a habit she had developed early, and had never entirely unlearned. Then she made tea. Then she went back to the type case and set the next morning's job. Cole's reply arrived 7 days later. He wrote, "I understand. Take the time you need. The second chair is not going anywhere." I put good wood in it. A pause in the letter she could read in the handwriting. The ink pressure changed. He had set the pen down, she would think later, and picked it up again. What came next was written slightly more carefully. "I want to say something that I hope isn't forward. I believe, based on 4 months of letters that have been more honest than most conversations I have had in person, that you are the person I built the chair for. I am not certain of this. I have never met you, but I am certain enough to wait, and I am not in the habit of being certain about things I am not reasonably sure of." Evelyn read this letter, standing at the type case in the early morning before her father arrived. Read it again, set it down, picked it up. She had read millions of words in her life. She had set thousands of pages of type. She knew, with a compositor's precision, the difference between a sentence that was doing something and a sentence that was merely occupying space. This sentence was doing something. She put the letter in the small drawer of the compositor's stand where she kept things she needed to be able to find quickly. She did not write back that morning. She needed to let the sentence settle into its proper place first. Outside, Boston went about its business. The street sounds rose and fell. The press waited. The type sat in its cases, orderly and patient. And in a house in Kansas, on a porch wide enough for 2 chairs, a cattle dog named Reckoning sat and watched the plains go still in the long light of spring, waiting, with considerably less complicated feelings about it, for whatever was going to happen next. There is a kind of waiting that is passive, that simply marks time. That is the waiting of a man who has set something in motion and now sits and hopes. Cole Hargrove did not do that kind of waiting. He planted the spring crop. He extended the south fence line by 60 yards, which he had been meaning to do for a year and had been putting off for reasons that were not good reasons. He repaired the barn roof. He broke 8 new acres on the northwest corner, which was still stubborn but slightly less so than the year before, which he noted in the farm ledger under a notation that read simply, "Progress." He wrote to Evelyn once a week, which he had been doing since December, and which he continued, and which she continued to answer, and which they had both tacitly understood was no longer courtship in the formal sense, but something harder to name. Correspondence. Yes, but also something more structural than that. The letters had become, without either of them deciding this, the place where they worked out what they thought. Cole had not known he needed that. He had understood himself as a man who thought privately, in the way that practical men do, usefully, efficiently, only about things that required solutions, and he still thought that way about the practical problems. But there was another category of thinking, apparently, that he had not fully understood he was doing, which was the thinking you do when you're trying to understand the shape of your own life. And this kind of thinking, it turned out, was better with someone on the other side of it. He had not expected this. He had built the chair because he knew he wanted someone in it. He had not known he also wanted this. Reckoning, who understood most things without knitting, came and sat next to him one evening while Cole was reading over a half-finished letter to Evelyn, and placed his head on Cole's knee with the settled confidence of an animal who has made an accurate assessment of a situation and found no reason to be anxious about it. Cole put his hand on the dog's head, looked out at the 2 chairs on the porch, the empty one, the May light coming long and golden across the land. He picked up the pen and finished the letter. He was 31 years old. He had 320 acres in Pawnee County. He had a house with a stone fireplace and south-facing windows and a porch with 2 chairs. He had a dog who understood him without words. He had 40 acres of turkey, red, wheat coming up clean, and a fence line that now ran where it had always needed to run. And he had a stack of letters in the right-hand drawer of the writing desk, tied with a piece of baling twine, because he didn't have ribbon, and baling twine held things together just as well. From a woman in Boston who set type with the same care he set fence posts, who used words like load-bearing elements rather than decoration, and who had once written to him, "I think honesty is not a virtue so much as a minimum standard. The floor, not the ceiling. Everything worth having is built above it." He had read that sentence more times than he would have admitted to Ira Colton. He read it again now, put the letter back in the drawer, went out to the porch, sat in his chair. The empty chair beside him held the late afternoon light waiting, with the patience of good ash wood and careful joinery, for the person it had been built for. Cole Hargrove looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the plains. Then he went inside and wrote another letter. April arrived in Kansas like an argument nobody wanted to have. Cold one day. Warm the next. The sky couldn't make up its mind. which, Cole understood, was not a personal commentary on his situation, but which felt like one anyway. He was writing a letter, had been writing it for 3 days, not the same letter. Different attempts. Same failure. The first version was 4 paragraphs long and explained everything. The drought conditions. Building in the Northwest, the equipment loan from the implement dealer in Larne that was coming due in July, the 20 head of cattle he'd lost in March, to a fever that moved through the herd before he understood what he was dealing with. Practical, honest. Everything Evelyn would want to know. He read it back, tore it in half. The second version was shorter. 2 paragraphs. Still honest. But the honesty had a shape to it that he didn't trust. The shape of a man asking to be reassured, which was not what he was asking. Or was not what he wanted to be asking. He couldn't tell the difference, and that bothered him more than either option. Individually, tore that one too. The third version was 1 paragraph. He stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it, set it on the corner of the writing desk, did not send it. Here is what the third version said. Miss Marsh. I find myself in a position I did not anticipate and am not yet certain how to characterize. I will write again when I have more clarity. Here is what the third version meant, which Cole understood clearly and could not bring himself to put into the actual words. I am not the man I described in the advertisement right now. I am a man with a loan coming due and a depleted herd and a wheat crop that may not produce enough to cover both. I am a man who has watched the northwest corner of his claim go dusty and dry when it should be wet and soft. I am a man who got up at 4 this morning because he could not sleep and stood on the porch in the dark and looked at the empty chair and felt something he could not afford to feel, which was doubt. Not doubt about her. Doubt about his right to her. There is a difference. Cole understood the difference completely, and completely failed, across 3 attempts and 4 days. To find a way to write about it that didn't make him feel like a man explaining why he was less than he'd claimed. He was not less than he'd claimed. He was exactly what he'd claimed. A man with 320 acres and 40 acres of wheat, and a stone fireplace and a porch with 2 chairs. The man he described was in temporary difficulty. Temporary difficulty, Cole had learned on the trail, had a way of not staying temporary, and inviting a woman from Boston into the middle of a situation that might get worse before it got better. That was not fair. That was not right. That was what he told himself. That was not the only thing that was true, but it was the thing that won. He did not send any letter. 1 week passed. Evelyn noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a compositor. She noticed everything about pattern and rhythm. Their correspondence had run like a well-set press for 4 months, regular, reliable, each letter answering the last and opening the next question, the way good dialogue builds on itself. And then, nothing the first week she assumed the mail. Mail was unreliable. Mail was subject to weather and distance and the variable competence of relay riders and the particular chaos of the western mail routes. 1 missed week meant nothing. The second week she wrote to him, not a long letter, brief, almost deliberately casual, which was not her natural register, which meant she was trying to be casual, which meant she was not Mr. Hargrove. I hope all is well on the claim. I have enclosed a short piece from a Boston pamphlet on the subject of wheat rust that seemed relevant to your turkey red experiment. Write when you can, she added, no weight to it, no inquiry. No indication that she had noticed the silence. She noticed the silence. She noticed it the way you notice a missing piece of type in a set line. A gap where something should be. Not a crisis. Not yet. But a wrongness. She posted the letter. She waited. In Kansas, Cole received Evelyn's letter on a Wednesday. Write it standing at the door of the barn. Read the note about the wheat rust pamphlet with the feeling of a man who has been treated better than he deserves and knows it. Put the letter in his shirt pocket. Went back to work. Did not write back. The equipment loan was due in 6 weeks. The wheat was coming in thin on the west side, where the topsoil had dried and blown in the April wind. He had 12 head of cattle left after the fever took the others, which was not nothing but was not enough to provide the kind of cushion that made borrowing against future crops feel reasonable. He had options. He knew this. He was not a man who couldn't see options. He could sell the east section, 40 acres of the better ground, and clear the debt and reduce his operation to something that was sustainable at smaller scale. He could approach the bank in Larned for a short extension, which they would probably give him because he had never missed a payment and had a reputation for reliability, which was the only collateral that truly mattered in Pawnee County. He could do what other homesteaders did and work through it quietly, running thin for a season, betting on the wheat coming back stronger in the fall. He was not desperate. He was not ruined. But he was, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely uncertain. And uncertainty in a man who has organized his entire existence around the ability to see clearly toward the goal. Uncertainty in that man feels like more than circumstance. It feels like a flaw in the instrument. And you don't invite someone to rely on a flawed instrument. He told himself this. 3 more weeks passed. He did not write. In Boston, Evelyn was training a young man named Silas. This was the fact she had not yet told Cole, not because she was hiding it, because she had not found the right letter for it, because the truth of why she was training Silas was complicated, in a way that required careful handling, which was ironic, given that she had opened her very first letter to Cole Hargrove with a declaration that she would not be careful with uncomfortable truths. Here was the uncomfortable truth. She had begun training Silas in February. In February, before her father's stroke, before there was any practical reason to train a replacement compositor. She had posted the letter to Cole in December. She had begun training Silas in February. She had told herself this was prudent planning, that her father was 60 years old and would not run the press forever, that good compositors were hard to find, and the time to train them was before you needed them, not after. All of this was true. None of it was the whole reason. The whole reason was that she had read a letter from a man in Kansas about a chair he'd built before the house was finished, and something in her had understood, without permission, without being asked, that she was going to go. That she had already decided, somewhere below the level of conscious decision, and that the practical mind was now quietly arranging the logistics. She had not admitted this to herself until the 3rd month. She had not told Cole. But she was training Silas. She was thorough about it, more thorough than strictly necessary for a backup compositor. She was training him the way you train someone who is going to run the operation. Her father noticed you're showing him the hoe settings. He said one afternoon, watching from his chair, he needs to know the press. You're showing him everything. A pause. He needs to know everything, Evelyn said. Gideon Marsh looked at his daughter, then at the press, then back at his daughter. When? He asked. I don't know yet, but you're going. Not a question, I don't know yet, she said again, which was not entirely true, which she was aware was not entirely true, which she was not quite ready to entirely admit. 3 weeks of silence from Kansas, then 4. Evelyn wrote a second letter, less casual, a single direct question wrapped in 2 sentences of context. I understand that circumstances change and that letters don't always account for what a season can bring. If something has changed, I would rather know than not know. Cole received it, held it, wrote half a response, did not finish it, did not send it. Week 5. She was at the post office on a Thursday morning, routine errand. Nothing specific, except she asked the clerk if there had been anything from Pawnee County, Kansas. There hadn't. How long has it been? The clerk asked because he was the kind of clerk who made conversation. 5 weeks, Evelyn said. Could be the mail. Could be, she said. It was not the mail. She walked back to the shop, stood at the type case, set 3 lines of type without really seeing them. Then she set the composing stick down, went to the small drawer of the compositor's stand, took out Cole Hargrove's letters. All of them, still in their envelopes. Organized by date, because she organized everything by date. She read last three, then the very first one. About turkey red wheat and a dog named Reckoning and the chairs. The chair was the point. The house is infrastructure. She read that sentence, put the letters back, went to the ticket window at South Station. Bought a ticket on the next available train to Abilene, Kansas. She told her father that evening, "I'm going to Kansas." Gideon Marsh set down his coffee cup. He had both hands back by then, mostly. The grip was still unreliable on the right. "To see about the man, to see about Thuacher," she said. A long silence. "Does he know you're coming?" "Not yet, Evelyn." "I know. That's not how." "He stopped writing," she said. Not with anger. With the calm of a woman who has made a decision based on evidence, and is now done deliberating. "He stopped writing, and I have been waiting for an explanation that isn't coming, and I am not willing to lose this over someone's silence, when I could simply go and find out what the silence means." Her father looked at her. "Take the extra wool coat," he said. "Kansas is cold," she wrote to Cole that night. One sentence. "I heard you stopped writing. I'm coming to see about that chair." She posted it. She had a feeling he would receive it about the same time her train arrived in Abilene. She was right. Cole was repairing fence on the South Line on a Tuesday morning, when Ira Colton's horse appeared at a gallop. Which was wrong. Ira Colton did not gallop. Ira Colton had a specific and deliberate relationship with his horse that was the equine equivalent of his relationship with everything. Steady, unhurried, reliable. The last time Cole had seen Ira at a gallop was during the cattle fever, when speed had actually been necessary. Cole set down the fence tool. Ira pulled up hard. "There's a woman," Ira said. He was slightly out of breath, which was also wrong, because Ira Colton was not the kind of man who got out of breath. At the Abilene station, Cole waited. "Says she's looking for a Cole Hargrove and a chair." A pause. Cole looked at Ira. Ira looked at Cole. "How long ago?" Cole said. "Hour, maybe." "She's waiting. She's got luggage." Cole looked at the fence line. Half repaired. Posts that needed setting. Work that was not going anywhere. He set the fence tool down in the grass. Walked to the barn. Got his horse. "Cole," Ira said. Cole stopped. "She came all the way from Boston," Ira said. "Alone, I know. Without being invited, I know." "That's either very foolish," Ira said, "or very certain." Cole looked at him for a moment. "She's not foolish," Cole said. He rode for Abilene. The Abilene station was 2 platforms, and a waiting room, and a ticket window that was only open on train days. It smelled like coal smoke and sawdust, and the particular animal smell that clung to any building in cattle country, regardless of how often it was swept. Evelyn Marsh was standing on the platform, not sitting, standing, with 2 bags and a trunk, and the posture of someone who comfortable waiting because she had decided to be comfortable waiting. And her decision stuck. Cole saw her from across the platform and stopped. She saw him. Neither of them moved for a moment. She was smaller than he'd imagined. Not small, he'd known from her letters, that she was physically capable, that she'd worked a press since she was 12. But somehow he'd built a larger picture in his mind, which said more about the size of her letters than anything else. She looked at him with an expression he would spend years trying to describe and never quite get right. Evaluation, yes, but warmer than evaluation. Like recognition, but careful. Like someone who has found the thing they were looking for and is giving themselves exactly 1 moment to be absolutely sure, before they allow themselves to believe it. He walked toward her. She didn't move. Let him come to her. Which was, he thought, exactly right, Miss Marsh. He said, "Mr. Hargrove." A pause. "I understand there's a chair," she said. He put her bags in the wagon. She climbed up without help and without comment on the fact that he hadn't offered it, which was because he'd started to offer, and she was already up, which he noted and found not surprising. They drove in silence for the first mile. The Kansas sky in May was a specific blue that had no equivalent in Boston. She looked at it, then at the grass, which was coming in green now, the spring growth soft and thick, the horizon running away in every direction. The light was long, and the air was dry, and the smell was grass and earth, and something she had no word for. She had read about the plains. She had not read anything that was actually accurate about the plains. It was like reading a description of the ocean and then arriving at the actual ocean and understanding that the description had done the ocean no service whatsoever. "It's larger than I expected," she said. "It keeps going." Cole said, "Does it stop eventually?" "Not in any useful sense." She almost smiled, almost. "You stopped writing," she said. "I did. For 5 weeks. Yes, I wrote to you twice. I know." "You received the letters?" "Yes." She turned and looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road, which was not a road so much as 2 ruts running through grass, but which required enough attention to justify looking at it. "I would like to understand what happened," she said, not angry. Evelyn Marsh did not do anger in the showy way. She did something quieter and more precise, which was the calm of a person who is holding a very specific question and intends to receive an actual answer. Cole drove for a moment. "I had a bad season," he said. "Tell me about it." Not all of it at once. Over the drive, which was 40 minutes, and then through the arrival at the house, which she looked at in a way he could not quite read. Steadily, thoroughly, the way she would read a proof, and through the unhitching of the horse and the bringing in of her trunk, the equipment debt, the cattle fever, the thin west field, the loan due in July, the calculations he'd been making and remaking. The moment in March when he'd sat down to write and understood that what he was about to write was an invitation, and that issuing an invitation into the middle of this situation felt dishonest. "I didn't want to bring you into something uncertain," he said. They were standing in the kitchen. He had not offered tea yet because he was still talking, and she had not asked for it. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Cole. She set her hat on the table. "What did you think I was coming to?" He looked at her. "What did you think," she said, "that I imagined I was agreeing to? When I wrote to a homesteader in Kansas, a man on a claim, on a frontier, who was growing experimental wheat. The wheat's not experimental anymore. It worked. That is not the point I'm making, I know. I am not a woman who did not understand the situation," she said. "I understood it. I chose it. And you deciding to protect me from it by going silent for 5 weeks is," she stopped. "Infuriating," she said. "It is infuriating." Cole considered this. "You're right," he said. A pause. "I know I'm right," she said. "I was wrong to stop writing." "Yes, I thought I was being considerate. You were being afraid," she said. "And calling it consideration." He looked at her for a long time. "Show me the books," she said. "Now?" "You have a loan due in July and you've been running the numbers alone for 2 months." "Show me the books." He showed her the books. They sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. Evelyn went through the farm ledger with the compounder line by line, looking for errors, looking for patterns, looking for the place where the numbers stopped telling the truth. She found 3 things Cole had missed, not because he was careless, but because he was too close to the material, which was a problem she understood from typesetting. You couldn't proofread your own work. Not really, because your mind inserted what should be there instead of seeing what was actually there. The 3 things she found: 1. The equipment dealer in Larned had been charging interest at a rate that was higher than the written contract. Not by much, but by enough over 16 months to add up to a meaningful discrepancy. 2. The east section, 40 acres of Cole's better ground, had a seasonal lease possibility he hadn't considered. A rancher in the next county was looking for summer grazing. 40 acres for 3 months at a reasonable rate would cover half the loan payment. 3. The turkey red wheat on the center field was projecting, based on the spring growth, considerably better than Cole's conservative estimate. He had been calculating based on last year's yield from the difficult season. This year's growth suggested a different number. She showed him these things without drama. She pointed. He looked. She moved to the next thing. "You weren't ruined," she said. "When they were done, I know. You were in a difficult season that was solvable, I know. Which you would have seen, she said. If you hadn't been doing the numbers alone, he looked at the ledger. I've been doing everything alone, he said. For a long time, I know. That's not an excuse. It's not, she agreed, but it's a reason. And reasons are worth understanding, even when they don't excuse. She was looking at the ledger. He was looking at her, looking at the way her hand rested on the open page. The ink stain on the side of her right index finger, the compositor's mark. The permanent evidence of a life spent working with type. The way she had set her hat on the table when she came in and not touched it since, as though she had decided she was staying and saw no reason to maintain the props of arrival. Outside, the May night was absolutely quiet, except for the coyotes, far off. Reckoning came in from the back room, where he had been conducting a thorough investigation of the newcomer's luggage with the focused methodology of an animal who takes assessment seriously. He walked to the table, looked at Evelyn. She looked back. This is reckoning, Cole said. She lowered her hand from the ledger, palm down, offered it to the dog at his level, not reaching, just offering. Waiting to see what he would do, Reckoning looked at her hand, sniffed it, sat down next to her chair, put his head on her knee. Cole watched this happen, with the expression of a man receiving confirmation of something he suspected but had not been sure of until this moment. He doesn't do that, Cole said. Generally, he did it now. He never did that with anyone. Well, Evelyn said. He seems to understand the situation. She stayed at Ira Colton's house that night, which was proper. Which was Ira Colton's immediate and non-negotiable offer when he saw the wagon pull up the next morning and understood what was happening. Which he understood quickly, because Ira Colton was not, despite his deliberate manner, slow. She'll stay with us, he said to Cole. Margaret will be pleased to have company. This was said with the particular firmness of a man who is doing Cole a kindness by preventing him from having to figure out the logistics himself. Thank you, Cole said. Don't thank me, Ira said. Go fix that fence you left half done yesterday. Evelyn looked at Cole. You left work half done to come get me, she said. The fence will wait. How long has it been half done? Since yesterday morning. She said, not disapprovingly. More like a woman filing a piece of information under a heading that might prove useful later. The heading probably said, this man will stop mid-task for things that matter to him, which was, she would reflect later, one of the most important things she had learned about Cole Hargrove in the first 24 hours. And one of the most important things she had needed to know. She spent 3 days. She had told Silas in the note she'd left that she would be gone 2 weeks. She had told herself she would assess the situation when she got there and make decisions based on what she found. What she found. The house was exactly as described. 4 rooms, south-facing windows, stone fireplace that was, in May, not yet lit but which she could see had been used, was well built, would heat the room properly. A kitchen that was organized the way a practical man organized things. Everything where it needed to be, nothing where it didn't, no concessions to aesthetics except one, which was a small shelf by the east window where Cole kept 4 books. She looked at the books. A Bible which she expected, Haskell's Agricultural Handbook, which she expected. A collection of newspaper essays on frontier policy, 1870 to 1878, which she expected, and a worn copy of Emerson's essays, which she did not expect, which she took down from the shelf and opened and saw, in Cole Hargrove's handwriting, small annotations in the margins, not many but precise. The kind a man makes when he is reading alone and needs to have a conversation with the text. And put back on the shelf with the feeling of having found a room in a house she thought she already knew. She saw the west field, which was thin. She saw the center field, which was coming in strong. She looked at both, with the interest of a woman, who was not a farmer, but who understood systems and could read what the evidence suggested. She met Margaret Colton, who was 40, practical, and who had been watching homesteaders come and go for 12 years, and had developed an accurate eye for which ones would last. Margaret Colton shook Evelyn's hand, looked at her for a moment, and then said, "You'll do," which Evelyn found more meaningful than any extended compliment would have been. She walked the claim on the third day. Cole walked with her. They went to the northwest corner, which was stubborn, to the center, which was generous, along the south fence line, which was melancholy, and which Evelyn understood as soon as she stood in it. The wind hit differently here, came in, low and relentless, and the grass grew thinner, as though it had made a decision to invest its energy elsewhere. "You understand the land," she said. "I've been listening to it for 2 years. You used those exact words in a letter. They're still accurate." She walked beside him for a while. The May grass came up to their knees in the good sections. The sky was doing its Kansas thing, which was to be larger than seemed physically possible, which she had already begun to get used to, which she knew she was never going to get fully used to, which was fine. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right, I started training Silas in February." Cole looked at her. "Before your father's stroke?" he said. "Yes," a pause. "You'd already decided." "I had decided without deciding," she said. "I had decided below the level where I was willing to admit to myself that I'd decided. And then my father had the stroke, and it gave me a practical reason that I could point to, which was more comfortable than the actual reason. Which was that I read your letter about the chair, and I understood that I was going to come to Kansas. And so I began preparing to come to Kansas." A pause. "I should have told you earlier." Cole walked with this for a moment. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because you told me about the money," she said. "You told me the true thing, the one that was hard to say, and I owe you the same." She looked at him sideways. "That's how this works. If it's going to work." Cole stopped walking. She stopped too. They were standing in the center field, 40 acres of turkey red wheat coming in green and strong around them, the sky enormous and blue above. He looked at her with the expression she would spend 40 years trying to describe precisely. Recognition. That was the closest she would ever get. The expression of a man who has been building toward a specific thing and has found it and is allowing himself carefully to believe it. "Yes," he said. "Yes, what?" "That's how it works," he said. "If it's going to work." She looked at him. "Show me the porch," she said. He showed her the porch. The 2 chairs were there. Ash wood, oiled, the grain warm and clear. They looked like they had been there forever, which, in a way, they had been built before the house was finished, before there was a porch to put them on, before there was anyone to sit in them. They had been waiting, with the patience of good joinery and the certainty of a man who knew what he was building toward. Evelyn walked to the second chair, stood in front of it for a moment, sat down. The view was the grass going on until it met the sky, which is a thing that people write and which sounds like a description of scenery. But when you are actually sitting in a chair on a porch in Pawnee County, Kansas, and the grass runs away in every direction and meets the sky at a horizon that goes on longer than your eye can follow, it is not scenery. It is a fact about the world. The world is very large, and you are in it. And being in it at the moment in this chair feels like the right place to be. She sat with this, didn't name it, just let it be. Reckoning came around from the back of the house, looked at the second chair, looked at Evelyn in it, sat down beside her with the settled weight of an animal who has already made up his mind and sees no reason to revisit it. "He approves," Cole said. "I noticed," she said. She looked at the grass for a while. "I need to go back to Boston," she said. "I know. My father needs more time. Silas needs more training. I know. But I will come back." A pause, not a dramatic pause. The pause of a woman who has set a line of type and is reading it back before committing it. "If you will stop the silence. If something is wrong, you tell me. If something is difficult, you tell me. If you are afraid, I'll tell you," he said. "Before you stop writing. Before I stop writing." She looked at the grass for another moment. "Good," she said. "Good," he said. The May afternoon went long and golden around them. The coyotes were quiet. The wheat stood in the center field. The cattle moved at the edge of the east section, and 2 chairs sat on a porch in Pawnee County, Kansas. Both of them occupied for the first time, which was not, Cole reflected, what he'd imagined when he built them. Which was, he also reflected, considerably better. She left on Thursday. He drove her to Abilene. They said goodbye on the platform, with the coal smoke smell and the particular awkward light of midday. "Write to me," she said. "I will, everything." "Everything," he agreed. She picked up her bag, stopped. "Cole." He looked at her. "Don't build any more chairs before telling me," she said. "I want to know what you're building toward before you start building toward it." He considered this. "That's fair," he said. "It's not a negotiation," she said. "It's a requirement." "Also fair," he said. And, for the first time in the 3 days she had been in Kansas, she smiled at him, not the almost smile from the wagon, the real one. It was, he thought, the best sentence he'd ever seen, and he had read a great deal. She stepped onto the train. He stood on the platform until it was gone. Then he rode back to Pawnee County, Kansas, through the May afternoon, with the particular sensation of a man who has been shown precisely what he is working toward and finds, now that he can see it clearly, that it was worth every difficult day of the building. She wrote from the train. Not a letter, a note on the back of her ticket stub, which she gave to the conductor at the stop before Kansas City, and which arrived at Cole's farm 6 days later, through a combination of goodwill and the specific logistical creativity of frontier mail. It said, "The planes are bigger than anyone tells you, and smaller than you need them to be, once you've sat in the right chair." Cole read this at the kitchen table. Write it again. Stood up, went to the writing desk, wrote back a letter, a real one, 4 pages. Everything she had asked for. Everything about the equipment loan, and his plan for the summer grazing lease, and the turkey red projection. And Reckoning's ongoing assessment of the small bag of books she had left, which the dog was treating as property requiring protection. Everything, and, underneath the practical news, at the end of the 4th page, in the smaller handwriting, he used, for the things that were true in the deeper way. "I have been building alone for a long time. I didn't know what I was missing until I stopped missing it. That's not something I have the right words for yet. But I'm working on it." He sent it. The letter arrived in Boston on a Tuesday. Evelyn read it at the compositor's stand, after her father had gone home. In the quiet of the shop, with the smell of ink and metal type, with the press waiting and the type in its cases, and the particular piece of a place where language was organized and made real, she read the last paragraph 3 times, set the letter in the drawer, went back to work, trained Silas for 2 more hours, then went home and wrote back. Summer passed like that, letters and work and letters. Cole cleared the equipment debt in July, using the grazing lease income and a stronger wheat yield than he'd projected, which gave him a satisfaction that was not about the money specifically, but about the accuracy of the revised estimate, about having another set of eyes on the numbers, about what it meant to stop running the problem alone. Evelyn trained Silas through the summer. Thoroughly, completely. The way you train someone who is going to run things without you. Gideon Marsh watched his daughter and did not comment, which was his form of communication when the subject was too important for words. By September, Silas was running the morning jobs, without supervision, by October. He was running afternoon jobs, by November. Evelyn walked him through the hoe press settings one final time, watched him complete a full run without error, checked the output, found it clean. She set the proof down on the type case. She went home. She wrote to Cole. The letter said many things. It said that Silas was ready, that her father was well enough, that the winter wheat she'd read about in his last letter sounded, from the description, like it was going to be the best year yet. At the end it said, "I am ready. If the chair is still there, I am ready." Cole received this letter on a December morning. He was at the writing desk. He read it once, stood up, walked to the porch. The December sky was a specific shade of pale blue that existed only in Kansas and only in winter. so clear it was almost painful. The grass was the color of old straw. The air was cold. The planes ran away in every direction. The 2 chairs were there, right where they'd always been. Cole looked at the second one. Then he went back inside, wrote back 3 words, "Come home, Evelyn." He had not used that word before, home. Not in any letter. It was not a small word. It was, in fact, the largest word in the English language when used correctly, which was when you meant it completely, and not as convention or convenience. He meant it completely. He sent the letter. Then he sat on the porch in December and looked at the 2 chairs and thought about what it meant to have built something worth calling that. She arrived in December. The Kansas sky, that morning, was the pale blue of old China, thin, clear. The kind of cold that didn't bluster, but simply settled, quiet and absolute, into every space that wasn't sealed against it. Cole was at the station. He had been there for 40 minutes before the train arrived, which he would not have admitted to anyone, except that Ira Colton was also at the station's door. Reasons that had nothing to do with the train, and everything to do with being the kind of man who shows up. And Ira saw him arrive early and said nothing, which was the most respectful thing Ira ever did. The train came in, the platform filled with steam and noise, and the particular organized chaos of arrival. And then Evelyn Marsh stepped down. She had the same 2 bags, the same trunk, the same posture, straight, unhurried, comfortable in her own mass, as though she had decided before getting off the train that she was going to be comfortable. And that was that she looked at Cole. He looked at her. Neither of them moved for a moment. This moment was different from the one in May. In May, they had been strangers wearing the faces of people they knew from letters. Close, but not quite matching. The way a word looks slightly different on the page than it sounds in your head. This moment had no gap. She was exactly who he knew. He was exactly who she knew. It sounds simple. It was not simple. It was the thing most people spend a lifetime looking for and never quite find. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Miss Marsh," he said. A pause. "You came back," he said. "You said come home," she said. "I don't use words I don't mean." He looked at her. She looked at him. Reckoning, who had come with Cole to the station, because reckoning went everywhere. Cole went, and had decided this was non-negotiable, pushed past Cole's legs, and walked directly to Evelyn, and sat down, looked up at her waiting. She reached down. Reckoning didn't wait for her hand to reach him. He stepped forward to meet it. "He remembers," Cole said. "Of course he does," she said. "He's not the kind of dog who forgets." Cole picked up her bags. "The chair's still there," he said. "I know," she said. "You told me in October. And November. And the last letter. I wanted to make sure you knew. I knew." Still, she almost smiled. They walked to the wagon. They were married on December the 20th, 1880, in the front room of the house, by Judge Whitmore, who had been county judge for 11 years, and who had performed more frontier marriages than he could count, and had the particular quality of a man who had seen so much of what life did to people that he had stopped finding any of it surprising and had arrived instead at a warm and comprehensive respect for the whole enterprise. There were 6 people present: Cole and Evelyn, Ira and Margaret Colton, Gideon Marsh, who had made the train journey from Boston, with his right hand still slightly unreliable and his bearing absolutely not, and a young woman from the neighboring claim named Dorothy Fells, who had befriended Evelyn during the 3 days in May, and who had, upon hearing that Evelyn was returning, shown up at the Colton house with a dried flower arrangement and the firm intention of witnessing what she called the only lodging in Pawnee County. To the most interesting story in Pawnee County. Judge Whitmore said the words. They said them back. Cole put the ring on Evelyn's finger, silver. A small wheat sheath engraved along the band. Simple. Exactly right. The way everything Cole did was simple and exactly right, which Evelyn had understood from his letters, and now understood in 3 dimensions, which was better. The judge looked at Cole. "Anything you want to say?" Judge Whitmore asked. "Before we make it official," Cole looked at Evelyn. Then it she came anyway, Cole said. I think that says it all. Evelyn looked at him. Not the almost smile. The real one. The whole one. The one he had first seen on the Abilene platform in May, and which had not lost any of its effect in the intervening 7 months. It says quite a lot, she said, reckoning, who did not actually say anything, but stood up at that moment with a dignity that the room found appropriate. Completed the ceremony in his own way. Dorothy Fells laughed. Gideon Marsh shook Cole's hand with the left one, which was the reliable one, and held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, which was everything he needed to say. Margaret Colton produced a cake from somewhere that no one had known existed until this moment, which was, Evelyn reflected, exactly the kind of thing Margaret Colton would do. Prepare something that mattered. Say nothing about it until it was time. They ate the cake. Outside, the December plains went on in the cold, clear light. The 2 chairs were on the porch, both of them occupied, intermittently throughout the afternoon, by various combinations of people who had things to say to each other, and found that the view helped. The first winter was instructive. Not difficult, not easy. Instructive, which is the right word for a season that teaches you things about yourself that you could not have learned any other way. Evelyn learned that Kansas were not Boston winters. Boston winters were cold in a way that was intimate and pressing, and surrounded you with the evidence of other people's warmth. The lamplight in windows, the smell of coal smoke from 100 chimneys, the sound of voices and horses, and the particular urban cacophony that told you, at all times, that you were among the living. Kansas winters were cold in a way that was enormous, open. The wind came from the northwest, and had been traveling a very long distance before it arrived at the Hargrove claim, and was not tired at all. The silence was a thing you could hold in your hands. The nearest neighbor was Ira Colton, half a mile east, and on the days when the snow came in hard and the world reduced to white and gray, and the particular pewter light of plains winter, that half-mile might as well have been 50. She was not afraid of it. She was honest with herself about the fact that it required adjustment. She wrote to her father in January, "The silence here is the largest thing I have ever inhabited. I am learning what to do inside it. Some days, I think I have been allowed inside my own head for 26 years and simply couldn't hear it over the press." She also wrote, "The fireplace works exactly as well as Cole said it would. The south windows catch the winter light. Reckoning sleeps next to my chair every evening, which I have been told is unprecedented in the dog's personal history. I am, on balance, well." She set up her desk in the second bedroom. The compositor's tools she had brought, the small hand-composing stick, the type gauge, the set of reference texts, arranged themselves on the shelves in the order she had always kept them. Muscle memory. The organizing principle of a person who had learned precision before she'd learned anything else. She brought the farm's accounts into order in February. The ledger, which she had first seen in May under crisis conditions, got a thorough restructuring over 3 February evenings. New categories, new notation system, a running forecast column on the right side that projected 3 months forward, based on current conditions. Cole sat with her the first evening. Watched her work. "You're redoing everything," he said. "I'm reorganizing everything. The records are accurate. The structure is inefficient. It's how I've always done it. I know. It's worked. It's worked despite itself," she said, not unkindly, factually. "You've been running on instinct, and the instinct is good. But instinct doesn't compound. A system does." He watched her make a column. Then another. "What's that one for?" "Seasonal variance. By field section. So you can see over time which sections perform consistently and which ones are dependent on conditions." He looked at it. "I didn't know I needed that." "You didn't," she said. "Now you will." By the time the March thaw came, Cole Hargrove knew more about his own operation than he had in 3 years of running it. Not because anything had changed, because he could now see what had always been true. This was what Evelyn Marsh brought to the Hargrove claim in the winter of 1881. Not the things a woman was supposed to bring. Not the soft domesticities and the gracious management of a household. She brought the compositor's eye, the habit of looking at a thing until you saw what was actually there, not what you expected to be there. The understanding that accuracy was not a constraint on life. It was the foundation of it. The library began that spring, not deliberately, the way most good things begin, which is incidentally, which is from a surplus of something that has nowhere else to go. She had brought 12 books from Boston in the trunk. Her own books, the ones from her compositor's stand, the ones she'd read until the spines cracked. She added them to Cole's 4 books on the east window shelf, which immediately proved insufficient as a storage system. Cole built a shelf in February. A real shelf, measured, leveled, properly bracketed, 6 feet long. Which sounds like enough room until you account for the rate at which a woman who has been reading since age 8 acquires books, which is a rate that no static shelf can fully anticipate. By summer, she had ordered 3 more titles from Kansas City. Margaret Colton borrowed 1, Dorothy Fells borrowed 2, Ira Colton, who did not appear to be a reading man, and who had never in 12 years mentioned a book in Cole's presence, came over one afternoon for a discussion about the summer grazing lease, and left with a copy of the agricultural essays that Evelyn pressed upon him, on the grounds that the section on soil rotation was directly relevant to the conversation they had just had. He read it, returned it. The section on legume rotation, he said. That's correct. That's what I've been seeing. I know, Evelyn said. That's why I gave it to you. By 1883, the shelf had become 2 shelves. By 1885, the front room had more books than furniture, which Cole did not mind, and reckoning found structurally interesting from a sleeping behind standpoint. Neighbors began, without formal invitation, to appear and borrow things. A family 3 miles west brought their eldest daughter, who was 12, and had read everything in the house twice, and was desperate. Evelyn found her 3 things she hadn't read. The girl came back in 2 weeks for more. Evelyn found 3 more, then 3 more. Dorothy Fells said, "You're running a library." "I'm lending books," Evelyn said. "That's a library." Evelyn looked at the shelves. "It needs a name," she said. "Call it the Hargrove Library," Dorothy said. "Everyone already does, so it was. The wheat years were good. Not every year. No year on the Kansas plains is wholly good. The weather has opinions, and the opinions change, and sometimes the opinions change mid-season in ways that require improvisation. But the turkey-red wheat was, as the Mennonite farmers had promised, extraordinary in its stubbornness. It did not want to fail. It had been bred over centuries by people who could not afford failure, and it carried that history in its grain. And Cole Hargrove's center field returned it faithfully through the early years of the decade. The cattle herd rebuilt, slowly, carefully. Cole did not rush it. The northwest corner remained stubborn. He planted it with a legume rotation in 1884, based on the agricultural essay Ira Colton had returned with a notation on the soil rotation section. It responded, not dramatically, not all at once. The way stubborn things respond to patient attention, which is gradually, and then more than you expected. They had their first child in 1882, a son. They named him Eli. He arrived on a February morning in a blizzard that confined everyone to the house for 3 days afterward, which Evelyn found appropriate, and Cole found alarming. In a way, he had never been alarmed by weather before, because now the weather was happening to people he could not afford to lose. Eli was not small, then not small. Then, running through the grass in the summer of 1883, with the specific shrieking certainty of a child who has discovered that open country is exactly the right size for being alive. Cole watched him from the porch one evening. Looked at Evelyn. "That family," he said. She looked at him. "The one I saw on the trail. In 1877. Before I filed the homestead." He watched Eli disappear into the tall grass and reappear 10 feet to the left. I rode past them and stopped. Sat on my horse for a long time, I know, she said. You wrote about it in the second letter. I couldn't explain it at the time. Could you now? He thought about it. I saw what I was missing, he said. Before I knew I was missing it, Evelyn looked at their son in the grass. You built the chairs, she said. I built the chairs. They sat with that for a while. The evening light came long and warm across the plains. Reckoning sat between their chairs with the satisfied posture of an animal who has been proven correct about everything and knows it. Their second child was a daughter, Clara, 1884 third, another son, James, 1887. Each of them grew up in a house where books were on the shelves, and language was treated as load-bearing material, where the evening habit, when work was done and the light was going, was to sit on the porch, in whatever configuration the sun allowed, and talk or not talk, but be there together. The children understood without being told that the two chairs were their parents' chairs, not a rule, just a fact. The way some things in a house have a settled quality that tells you they belong to their specific place and their specific people, and the correct response is to find your own place and not disarrange theirs. Eli asked once, when he was 7, why his father had built the chairs before the house. Cole thought about how to answer this for a child. If you don't know what you're building toward, he said finally, you might build something and not know what it's for. Eli considered this. So the chairs are what it's for, he said. The chairs are what it's for, Cole said. Eli thought about this for a moment. What are the chairs for, he said. Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Cole. Ask me when you're older, Cole said. Ellie looked unsatisfied. I'll ask Mother, he said. Your mother will give you a more precise answer than I can, Cole said. That's fine. Then came 1886. The summer started wrong. The spring had been dry. Everyone noticed, but no one said it plainly, because on the Kansas plains there is a superstition about naming bad weather conditions too directly, as though the act of speaking them gives them permission to confirm themselves. So people said things like patchy and variable, and we'll see how it goes, which is what people say when they know how it's going, and don't want to. By June it was clear. The drought was real, not a difficult season, not a dry spell. A drought, the kind that comes with the particular malice of a problem that gets worse slowly, that lets you hope each week, slow week, come the next week will break differently, and doesn't. The center field thinned. The northwest corner, which had been showing improvement after 2 years of legume rotation, went to dust. The cattle moved to the creekbed sections, where the water still ran, which meant overgrazing those sections, which meant additional problems compounding on the existing ones. Cole ran the numbers in July, ran them again in August. The numbers said the same thing both times. He did not tell Evelyn immediately. Not because he was reverting to silence. He had understood the cost of that and had not repeated it, but because he was still working through what to tell her. The situation required accuracy before communication. He was organizing his understanding before he organized his words. He told her in August. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she looked at the ledger. What are the options, she said. Not a question. A starting point. They listed them. Together, the way they had learned to do things. Sell the east section. Reduce the herd further. Request a bank extension, enlarned. Look for additional income from somewhere. Though where was the question? None of the options were good. Some were less bad than others. They went through each one. Evelyn was quiet that evening. After supper, Cole noticed, knew her well enough not to push. She was working something through. The way she worked things through, which was internally, precisely and thoroughly, before she said anything. He went to bed. She stayed up. He heard her moving around the house until late. The small sounds of a woman doing something that required focus. He told himself it was the accounts. Told himself she was finding something he'd missed, the way she sometimes did, the number that changed the picture. He woke up at 3 in the morning, and the house was quiet. He went back to sleep. The letter to Boston went out on a Tuesday. Evelyn wrote it herself, posted it herself. On a trip to town for supplies that she folded into the regular run so that it was one errand among several and did not stand out. Cole did not know about the letter. He did not know about it for 3 weeks. What he knew in September was that the Larned Bank had agreed to extend the loan period. What he knew was that the extension gave them breathing room into the following spring. What he knew was that the numbers had shifted, subtly but meaningfully, in a direction that made survival through the drought not just possible but likely. He thought he had found an error in his own projections. He had done it before. Evelyn had shown him how. He went through the ledger twice looking for what he'd fixed. Couldn't find it. Went through a third time. And then he walked into the library in 1886. The library was still in the extended shelving of the front room, running floor to ceiling on the east and south walls. It had become the kind of room that felt different from the rest of the house, that had its own atmosphere, its own specific gravity. He went in to look for the agricultural accounts. He kept in a folder on the bottom shelf. He found the folder. And then he looked at the shelves, the east wall, the section where Evelyn kept the books she had brought from Boston. The ones from her father's shop, the compositing references, the essays, the novels she had read until the spines gave way and had repaired with careful strips of brown paper. Because she did not throw away books that still had reading left in them, the section was not empty. But it was thinner. He stood in front of it, counted the gaps, 8 books gone, not moved. He knew where everything in this room lived. They lived in specific places and had been living there for 5 years, and the muscle memory of the room told him clearly that 8 books were missing from the section that belonged to Evelyn's Boston collection. He stood there for a while. Then he walked to the writing desk in the kitchen, opened the letter drawer, found the receipt from the Kansas City bookseller, dated June, for 8 volumes, described as a collection sale of compositional references and 19th century essays, sold rather than purchased. The receipt was there because Evelyn organized everything, including the evidence of what she had done. Cole looked at the receipt for a long time. He knew what the books were worth. He knew because he had seen her with them and listened to her talk about them. The compositional references she had used since she was 12. The essays she had annotated in the margins with the small, precise handwriting she used when she was arguing with a text. The novels she had carried from Boston in a trunk, on a train to a frontier she had never seen, because she could not imagine leaving them behind. The amount on the receipt matched, almost exactly, the difference in the ledger, the difference he had not been able to find, because it wasn't in the ledger, because she had not put it in the ledger. He sat down at the kitchen table. The September afternoon light came through the south windows, the same windows that had been catching the winter light since he built them, that Evelyn had stood in front of on her first morning and said, "The light is good," which he had understood was a kind of approval that meant more than it sounded. He sat there. Reckoning came and sat next to him, put his head on Cole's knee. Cole put his hand on the dog's head. Outside, Evelyn was in the kitchen garden. He could see her through the window, moving between the rows with the organized attention she brought to every system, checking, noting, adjusting. She was wearing the blue dress she wore for outdoor work. Her hair was up. Her hands were dirty. She looked like someone who had been here for a long time. She looked like someone who was going to be here for a long time more. And Cole Hargrove, who had driven cattle up the Chisholm Trail for 8 years and built a house with his own hands and broken 40 acres of stubborn Kansas sod and had genuinely believed that he had run out of things that could surprise him, sat at his kitchen table in September of 1886 and felt something open in his he had never felt, not because of before, not because of the money, not because of the problem it had solved. Because of what it meant to be loved by someone who would do that without saying a word, without making it a sacrifice, without putting it in the ledger, who would simply do it because the situation required it. And she had the means, and the means were hers to use, and this was what you did when you had decided a pup was worth protecting. He did not cry. He was Cole Hargrove. He sat very still at the kitchen table for a long time. Reckoning did not move. The afternoon light shifted on the floor. Then Cole stood up. He walked to the door, opened it, stepped out into the kitchen garden. Evelyn looked up. She saw his face. She knew he knew. A long moment passed between them. The kind that needs no translation. "You should have told me," he said. "You would have told me not to," she said. Yes, so he looked at her. She looked at him. Not defiant, not apologetic, simply certain. The way she was certain about everything she had decided was correct. "They were yours," he said. "They were books," she said. "The land is real." Evelyn, Cole, a pause. "I would have found another way," he said. "Maybe," she said. "This way was faster." He stood in the garden for a moment. Then he said, "I'll replace them. Not necessary." "I will, Cole." It'll take time," he said. "I know, but I'll replace them." She looked at him. "All 8?" she said. "All 8. And whatever else you should have." She was quiet for a moment. "The compositional handbook will be difficult to find," she said. "It was an 1863 edition. I'll find it. It's genuinely rare. I'll find it anyway." She looked at him with the expression she had spent years describing to herself in various ways, and had eventually stopped trying to describe, because it was simply the expression of Cole Hargrove looking at her, which was its own thing and did not need a category. "All right," she said, "all right." He said. He went back inside, stood at the kitchen window, watched her go back to the garden, watched her move between the rows, and thought that if someone had told him on the trail in 1877 that the thing he was missing was this. Not just company, not just the warmth of a body in the house, not just the practical relief of another mind on the numbers, but this specific thing, which was the feeling of being known so completely by another person that they would sell their books without telling you to keep your land. He would not have had the words for it. He had the words now. They were the true ones. He went to the writing desk, opened the small brown notebook he kept in the back compartment, wrote down what had happened, not all of it, just the part that was the point. Then he closed the notebook, put it back, and went to help with the supper. The drought broke in October, not with dramatic rains, with the quiet return of normal weather, which was all anyone wanted, which felt, after months of watching the sky for something it refused to give, like abundance. The following spring was good, and the spring after that, the operation rebuilt, slowly, permanently, with the kind of solidity that comes from having been tested in a specific way and having survived it, which tells you something about what you're built on that fair weather never can. Cole replaced the books. It took 4 years. He found them one at a time, through booksellers in Kansas City, and eventually through a dealer in Chicago, who specialized in compositional references. Each one arrived by mail in brown paper wrapping. Each time, he set it on Evelyn's desk without comment. She found each one in turn, never thanked dramatically, never, just put it on the shelf, in its proper place, with the same quiet care she gave everything. The compositional handbook, the 1863 edition, took until 1891 and required the specific assistance of a bookseller in Philadelphia who happened to know of a single copy in a private collection being dispersed. Cole paid considerably more than it was worth in monetary terms, which he considered a reasonable expenditure. When it arrived, Evelyn stood at her desk for a long time holding it. She opened the front cover, ran her hand over the typeface of the title page the way a person runs their hand over something they had, and lost and are making sure is real. "Well," she said, "to no one, specifically, or to the book, or to the room." She put it on the shelf, went back to work. Cole had watched from the doorway. He didn't say anything either. Some things are completed by doing them, not by discussing. The library got its own room in 1890. Cole built it himself. on the north side of the house, a proper addition, 12 feet by 16, with 4 walls of shelving, and a window that faced west to catch the afternoon light, and a reading table in the center that was large enough for 2 people to use at once. He built the shelving before he built the walls. Evelyn watched him do this and said nothing for almost a full week. "You built the shelving before the walls," she finally said. "The shelving is the point," he said. "The walls are infrastructure." She looked at him. He was working, not looking at her. But she could see from the angle of his head that he knew exactly what he'd said, and exactly what she thought of it, which was that it was both infuriating and completely correct, and she was not going to give him the satisfaction of laughing. She laughed anyway. It was, he thought, the best sound in Pawnee County. By 1892, the Hargrove Library had 240 volumes. By 1895, it had a lending register, Evelyn's idea, a simple system, a name and a date and a return date, which told you who in the county was reading what, and meant you could put the next book in line in the right hands without waiting to be asked. People came from 6 miles away. The 12-year-old from 3 miles west came every 2 weeks for years. Her name was Alice Pemberton, and she grew up reading everything Evelyn could find for her, and went, eventually, to a teaching college in Wichita, which she would later tell her own students she could not have imagined doing if it hadn't been for a lending library. In a farmhouse in Pawnee County, Han, run by a woman who treated books like necessities, not luxuries. Necessities, because that was how Evelyn treated them, because that was what they were. The years built on each other, which is what years do. They built in the way that good structures build, not by adding identical things on top of each other, but by responding to what the previous year required. Some years added, some years removed. Some years tested the foundation and found it sound. Ely grew up and stayed on the land. Clara grew up and went to Kansas City and married a printer, which Evelyn found appropriate, and which Gideon Marsh, who had lived long enough to meet his grandchildren and hold them and understand that his daughter had done exactly right, found perfect. James grew up and went north. Montana. A different kind of frontier. He wrote home regularly. Letters that had his mother's habit of directness and his father's habit of precision, and which arrived every few weeks and were read aloud at the kitchen table. Gideon Marsh died in 1901, peacefully, in the rooms behind the print shop where he had spent his working life. Silas had been running the shop for 15 years by then and ran it well. The press was in good hands. Evelyn went to Boston for the funeral. Cole could not leave during the harvest. She went alone, spent a week in the rooms she had grown up in, helped sort her father's things, sat at the compositor's stand one last time and ran her hands over the type cases with the particular attention. You give things you are saying goodbye to. She put back her father's compositing stick, the brass-handled one he had used for 30 years, and a small photograph, her parents young, before Evelyn's mother died, standing in front of the press with the expressions of people who had built something and knew it. She put the photograph on the library shelf, where it stayed. Cole Hargrove was not a man who slowed visibly. He slowed the way good machinery slows, not by failing, but by running at a different speed, efficiently, without drama, with the occasional indication that certain tasks were being redistributed to younger equipment, which, in practical terms, meant Easli was doing more of the heavy fence work by 1910, and Cole was doing more of the planning and the problem-solving and the sitting on the porch, watching the cattle, and knowing from long experience what he was seeing. He still rode, he still walked the claim, slowly, sometimes, but all the way around. He still sat in his chair every evening. He still talked to Evelyn about everything, more, if anything, than in the early years. Because the practical urgencies had reduced, and what was left was the conversation itself. The thinking out loud that letters had started and 40 years of evenings had continued. He told her things he had never told anyone, about the trail, about the men he'd known on it and what had happened to them, the ones who had stayed and the ones who had. About the winter of his second all year on the claim, when the wind had been blowing for 11 days straight, and he had understood for the first time what genuine solitude cost. She told him things she had never told anyone. About the months after her mother died, when she had been 8 years old, and the only way she could make sense of the world was to be in the shop, to set type, to organize letters into words, into sentences that meant exactly what they said, because meaning what you said felt like the most important thing there was sus. They had 40 years of these conversations. And the curious thing, the thing Evelyn would think about later, much later, sitting on the porch in the prairie light, was that the conversations never ran out. You would think they would. You would think that two people who had been talking to each other for 40 years would eventually say all the things and arrive at the end of the supply. They didn't, because the conversations were not about exhausting topics. They were about being in the world together, which generates new material constantly, which is actually the only topic that never runs out. Cole died in March of 1918. He was 69 years old. His heart had been working hard for a long time. It had built a house, and driven cattle, and broken 40 acres of sod, and gone through one drought and several difficult seasons, and raised 3 children and carried, for 4 decades, the specific weight of a man who had decided to build his life deliberately, and had done exactly that. The heart earned its rest. He died at home, in the bed in the south room, where the light came through the windows in the morning. Evelyn was there. Eli was there. The doctor said it was peaceful, which was the doctor's way of saying there was nothing more that needed doing, which Cole would have found satisfactory. The March morning was quiet. The sky was the pale gold of early spring. The grass was just beginning to show the new season's green underneath the winter straw. Evelyn sat in her chair on the porch that afternoon. The chair beside her was empty. She sat and looked at the plains going still in the long light. She did not try to hold the 40 years in her mind all at once. You could not do that. The 40 years were too large for that. They could only be held in pieces, specific days, specific conversations, specific moments that had the quality of clarity that important moments sometimes have, where you know as they're happening that they are the ones you will carry. The chair's first day. The look on his face at Abilene. The kitchen table in May, 2 in the morning, the ledger between them. The wheat in the center field. Coming in green and strong, the library. The shelves going up before the walls. His face in the kitchen garden in September of 1886, standing in the rows, looking at her, the way he had said they were yours, the way she had said they were books, and what had passed between them in the silence after, which was more than the words on either side. The births of 3 children, the deaths of people they loved, the seasons of abundance, the seasons of difficulty, the evenings on the porch when they talked, and the evenings when they didn't, when the silence was its own kind of conversation. 40 years, which was too much to summarize, too much to hold, and exactly the right amount. She sat until the sun went down, then she went inside. She went through his desk 3 days later, methodically, the way she did everything. Left drawer first, then right, then the middle, then the small compartment at the back that you had to lift before pulling. She was looking for the deed to the north pasture, which was practical, which was necessary, which was also, she recognized, the kind of task that gives you something to do with your hands when your hands need something to do. She found the deed. She also found a letter from his mother, dated 1888, that she had not known existed. The homestead filing papers, carefully preserved in their original envelope. A receipt from a Chicago bookseller, dated 1891. For one compositional handbook, 1863 edition. She held this for a moment. She had not known where it came from. She had not asked. She had understood he would find it, and he had found it, and she had not needed the details. But here was the receipt. Here was the number he had paid. which was considerably more than the book's monetary value, and which she read twice. Then she found the small compartment, which stuck, which she had to lift the front edge of before pulling, which was empty except for one thing, a small notebook, brown leather, worn soft from years in a shirt pocket, the corners curled inward. She sat down, opened it, his handwriting, the precise, unhurried handwriting she had known for 40 years. Clear and deliberate, the writing of a man who chose his words and then wrote them as though they deserved to be written carefully. Sentences, not his own sentences. Hers phrases from her letters, copied out by hand. Not all of them. He had not transcribed their correspondence in full, just the ones that had landed in some particular way, the ones that had, apparently, struck him as worth keeping, the ones he had written into this notebook over 40 years. She read them in order. I don't lead with the information that might discourage, because I find that practice dishonest and therefore useless. December 1879. The West seems to me a place where a person might be allowed to be exactly what they are. December 1879. I think honesty is not a virtue so much as a minimum standard. The floor, not the ceiling. February 1880. Everyone has a past they built before they knew better. What matters is what you build after. May 1880. The planes are bigger than anyone tells you and smaller than you need them to be, once you've sat in the right chair. June 1880. The silence here is the largest thing I have ever inhabited. I am learning what to do inside it. January 1881. They were books. The land is real. September 1886. Page after page. 40 years of pages. Her words in his handwriting. She heard herself from 30 years ago. From 20. From last year. Heard herself the way you hear. A recording of your own voice. Slightly unfamiliar. Slightly more than you remembered being. She had been smarter than she remembered, in the early letters. More frightened in the middle ones than she had admitted to herself at the time. More certain, in the later ones, than she had known she was. He had seen all of it. He had kept all of it. She turned to the last page. The handwriting was slightly different, more deliberate. The pen had moved more slowly. This was written recently. Or recently for Cole, which meant the last few years, when his hands had the slight trenchmark he didn't mention. And she didn't mention either because some things are better witnessed quietly. 2 lines. She came anyway. I should have known. The chair knew first. Evelyn held the notebook for a long time. The house was very quiet. Outside, the March wind moved through the grass. The same wind that had been moving through this grass for every day of the 40 years. The same wind that had been there before they arrived and would be there after everyone who knew them was gone. She had come to love the wind. Not immediately. It had taken time. In the early years, it was the thing that made winter hard and summer relentless, and the plains feel, occasionally, like a place that was simply indifferent to human presence. But that was the thing. Eventually, the indifference was not hostility. The plains did not care about your grief, or your joy, or your plans, or your fears. They simply continued. The grass grew. The sky changed. The wind moved through it all. Constant and unsentimental. Giving you nothing but the truth of what was present. She had learned to find that honest. She had learned to find it in the way that you find things that require learning. Deeply comforting. She folded the notebook, put it in the pocket of her dress, stood up, walked to the porch, sat in her chair. The empty chair was beside her. She looked at it. Ash wood, oiled, the grain still warm and clear. The joinery still sound. 40 years on a porch in Kansas, through heat and cold, and the particular erosion of weather on wood, and the chairs were still exactly what they had been. Because he had built them well. Because he had known what he was building toward, and had not cut corners on the things, was the point. She thought about him standing in front of the unfinished house in the summer of 1879, placing 2 chairs on a porch that had no roof yet, looking out at the Kansas grass, before the house was finished, before there was anyone to sit in them. Certain, she thought about the advertisement, the practical sentences, And then the last one, which had been the true one, which had been the sentence he had written down in 17 different versions, and crossed out 16 of them before landing on the one that meant what he meant. She thought about reading it in Boston, at the compositor's stand, in the evening light, after her father had gone home and the press had gone. Quiet, she had read it 3 times, then taken out a sheet of paper and written the most honest letter of her life. She thought about the train to Abilene in December, the Kansas sky, the way he had looked at her on the platform, the word he had used a year later in a 3-word letter, "Come home, Evelyn." She thought about 40 years of evenings on this porch, the conversations and the silences, the way the light moved across the land in different seasons, the way the sky changed color from August to October in a way that was different every year, and the same every year. She thought about the books on the shelves inside, all 240 of them, the compositional handbook he had found after 4 years and paid too much for and left on her desk without a word. She thought about Alice Pemberton, who had come every 2 weeks for years and gone to college and become a teacher. She thought about the 3 children who had grown up in this house where words were load-bearing material. She thought about the ledger in the kitchen, still organized, still running the forecast column she had designed in the winter of 1881, and which Eli used now the same way. She thought about Reckoning, who had died in 1893, and was buried at the south fence line where the wind hit hardest, because that had seemed right, because that was where the grass grew thin, and something steady was needed. She thought about everything, not in order, not in any useful sequence, just all of it at once, the way 40 years arrives when you sit down to hold it. Then she stopped thinking and simply sat. The wind moved through the grass. The March afternoon light went long and golden. The empty chair beside her held the last of it. She reached into her pocket, took out the notebook, held it, and understood something she hadn't been able to articulate. That first morning she sat in the second chair. Not just that the chair was the point, but that it was the right chair, at the right time, with the right person in the one beside it, that you could build a chair perfectly, choose the wood, and work the joints and oil the grain until it came up warm and clear, and it would be a good chair, it would last. But the point was never just the chair. The point was the sitting down, the choosing to sit down, the staying in the chair through 40 years of seasons. Not because you had no other options, but because this was where you had decided to be, and that decision, made once and remade every day in the small, ordinary ways, was the whole of it. That was what 40 years had confirmed. She put the notebook back in her pocket. She sat in her chair until the sun went down, then she went inside. The notebook stayed in her pocket. It would stay there for a long time. Years later, much later, Ellie Hargrove was 38 years old and sitting on the porch on a late spring morning with a small, brown leather notebook in his hands. He had found it in the writing desk. He had been looking for the deed to the north pasture. He had found the notebook. Instead, he read it from the beginning, the sentences his mother had written in letters, his father's handwriting. 40 years of pages, the lines that had landed, the lines that had been worth keeping. He read slowly, the way his mother had taught him to read, the way she read things that were worth reading, completely, without distraction. Going back for the sentences that needed a second visit, he read the last page. She came anyway. I should have known. The chair knew first. He sat with that for a long time. The 2 chairs were there, both of them. His mother's chair empty now, his father's chair empty now. The grass going on until it met the sky. The same grass, the same sky. The same horizon that had been there before his father rode up on a horse in 1877 and looked at a piece of ground and decided this was the place he was going to make something. Eli looked at the empty chairs. He understood for the first time, not what his father had built, but why. And that was, he thought, the more important knowledge. Not the land, not the operation, not the library, or the ledger system, or the turkey red wheat, or any of the tangible and practical things that a man with 320 acres could point to and call his work. But this, the decision to know what you were building toward before you started building, the decision to put the point first, the chairs before the roof, the honesty before the comfort, the letter before the certainty, the person before the plan. He closed the notebook, looked at the grass somewhere on the claim. His own children were doing whatever they were doing in the way that children do things on Kansas mornings in May, with the absolute conviction that this moment is the most important moment that has ever happened. He should go find them. He would. In a minute he sat in his father's chair first. Let the wind be what it was. Let the silence be the honest thing it had always been. And sat there for a while. In the chair his father had built first, before the house, before the reason, before anything except the knowledge of what he was building toward, which turned out to be exactly right, which turned out to be exactly enough.